All right. Hello to everyone. Hello to all the future elected leaders, elected officials, campaign managers, and just the generally curious people out there listening. Welcome to Learn How to Run for Office in 60 Minutes. I am Courtney Carroll, and I'll be serving as today's moderator. Now, this program is proudly brought to you by the ABA Young Lawyers Division and NationBuilder as part of the WildE Seat at the Table initiative. We are very excited to have Taylor Sayig and Sorcha Rochford from NationBuilder join us on. Now, as many of you already know, since our inception in 1934, the ABA WildE has been a significant voice for young lawyers. Today, as the largest young lawyer organization in the world, our division continues to yield influence in our association, the legal profession, and around the globe. So, what is the Seat at the Table initiative? The Seat at the Table initiative leverages our division's robust membership to develop the next generation of dynamic and innovative leaders for our communities. And how do we do that? Through educational programs such as this webinar, online resources, live speakers. Seat at the Table will help you learn what it takes to run for office, serve on boards and commissions, and just become better policy advocates. When WildE Chair Tommy Preston and the WildE Civic Engagement Director Cabell Clay first started exploring ideas for Seat at the Table, they quickly identified NationBuilder and its runforoffice.org nonprofit arm as the ideal partnership. Just as Seat at the Table seeks to educate and empower our young lawyers to become leaders in their communities, NationBuilder provides the information and tools necessary to run for office. And trust me when I say that there is no organization better poised to help our young lawyers plot the path to seeking an elected position. So without further ado, let me introduce you to the esteemed speakers today from NationBuilder. First, we have Sorcha Rochford, who is NationBuilder's Director of Community Strategy. Sorcha is responsible for the overarching strategy and ongoing success of NationBuilder's largest and most strategic customers. She also manages the go-to-market activities for a portfolio of new features and existing features through the full customer lifecycle. Sorcha, you can say hello so the listeners put a voice to the name.
Of course. Hi, everyone. Really excited to be with you all today.
Fantastic. And we also have Taylor Sayig, who is the Demand Generation Manager at NationBuilder. And Taylor works alongside the sales, customer engagement, and product teams to drive, build, and nurture key prospects and customer relationships for the long term. Taylor is also responsible for creating webinars, digital campaigns, and other educational content. And Taylor, you can say hey to everyone as well.
Hello, everybody. Thanks so much for having us here. We can't wait to dig into the presentation.
All right. And now that we've met our experts, I will go ahead and turn it over to Taylor and Sorcha to present this invaluable information. Ladies, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Courtney. So first things first, who the heck is NationBuilder and why are we talking to you about running for office? NationBuilder is the world's most used software for politics. We were founded in 2009 with the strong held belief that the world needs more and better leaders. It's our mission to strengthen democracy by offering the tools of leadership to everybody. We are a nonpartisan company. We have thousands of customers in over 100 different countries. And yes, we are a tech company. However, our tech was built by organizers, many of whom come from pretty impressive campaign backgrounds. Some of the most impactful campaigning best practices are baked into the NationBuilder itself. So what are we going to cover today? First things first, we're going to cover running for office and how to discover the offices that you're actually eligible for. Second, we'll go through some case studies and inspiring success stories and campaign wins with some pretty unlikely candidates. Next, the campaign arc, which includes all of your pre-campaign work, leading up to your campaign launch, and of course, what you should be doing on election day. Your infrastructure and all the digital tools that you need to run a tech-savvy and modern campaign. And lastly, how we can help. So first things first, take a look at this list of definitions. This is a ton of political jargon. These terms are going to be frequently used by Sorcha and I throughout the course of this webinar. Please just scan through this list. If there's anything that looks unfamiliar to you, please feel free to drop it in the chat. The one really key term that we want you to ingrain in your brain is GOTV, which means get out the vote. This is a ton of effort aimed at increasing voter turnout to your elections. So I'll give one more moment to just scan through this list, and then we will be off to our presentation. Great. I want you to run for office. This is not just a graphic, this is a call to action. Your Seat at the Table initiative is all about developing the next generation of dynamic and innovative leaders in your communities, and this 100% could be you. Our goal today is to help you come away from this feeling equipped and excited to throw your hat in the ring. It's possible, we will teach you how, and we'll do it in the next 60 minutes. So this all starts with discovery. The first thing that you need to do is figure out what leadership positions are actually available to you. Now, I have a question and would like to take a quick poll here. How many of you have gone through the work of logging on to the Run for Office site and searching your available positions? Cool. If you're unfamiliar with Run for Office, it's a program built by NationBuilder that allows you to search our free database for the offices that you're eligible to run for. In the chat, give me a yes or some sort of celebratory thing, maybe shout out the position that you're excited about if you've done that search. Run for Office search surfaces all of your elected offices, your filing window deadlines and election dates, and we even offer a free course called How to Run for Office. You all are getting a leg up on the competition because we're essentially giving you a crash course on all of that today. It also helps you get the free voter file with all of the voters in your district, and that also includes historical voter information. The Run for Office program does not stop with us. We have a ton of incredible partners that we work with, and we all have this common goal of creating more and better leaders in the world. After today's session, please be sure to check out some of our awesome partners who are listed here. They all provide resources, tools, training, all of which to equip young leaders to run for office. So with that, let's shift into some of the nitty-gritty.
Awesome. So in this webinar today, we are going to cover the foundations you'll need for your campaign, establishing a win number, learning about your district and your supporters, and ultimately launching your campaign. Up first, we're going to start by sharing some success stories from NationBuilder customers who have, in some instances, run and won their campaigns on NationBuilder. So, Randall Woodford. Randall was a NationBuilder customer in 2016 where he ran for mayor of Birmingham, Alabama. I personally worked with Randall's team to implement their campaign plan into the NationBuilder software. Randall and his team were not what you would actually traditionally expect when you think of a campaign team. His campaign manager was an artist and his team was just compiled of local members of their community. They really put an emphasis on listening to their constituents rather than the traditional stump speeches, and it worked. This was a historic race. He beat the 7-year incumbent. The 36-year-old was not a candidate that people thought could actually do this, but he went ahead and made history, becoming the youngest mayor in more than a century of the city's history, and inspired 11.5K first-time voters to turn out in a municipal election, which we'll talk about later on, but it is a very hard thing to do.
Now let's shift gears and talk about entrepreneur and outsider candidate Andrew Yang. He's running as a Dem in the 2020 presidential election. The media has called this guy a longer than long shot candidate, and in fact, the Washington Post published an article called, and I quote, "Random Man Runs for President, How Andrew Yang, a moderately successful businessman and complete unknown, made a place for himself in the 2020 presidential race." Yang started his campaign as an internet meme and then cultivated this impassioned following who fondly called themselves the Yang Gang. His campaign is not made up of savvy political operatives. In fact, a ton of his campaign is actually powered by his volunteers. He already qualified for the first 2 debates and has now surpassed the number of unique donors needed to qualify for the 3rd and 4th debates. The last milestone that he needs to hit here to lock in his place on the stage is to hit 2% in 4 qualifying polls.
So throughout this webinar, we're actually going to use a hypothetical campaign. Sally, who is running for City Council in District 5 of Quincy, Massachusetts. which actually happens to be my hometown. So if you are from Quincy, let me know in the chat and we can talk more. So what you're seeing on the screen now is the framework that you need to build your campaign around. These are going to be the pillars of your entire campaign plan. We're going to dig into each of them as we go throughout the webinar. So we're going to cover the foundations you'll need for your campaign: establishing a win number, learning about your district and supporters, launching your campaign, and actually architecting a GOTV plan. We're not going to fuss over expensive polling data, crazy algorithms, and models. Instead, we will look at how you can construct a solid foundation for your campaign's victory based on freely available public information. So now we're going to jump into another poll. Who here knows what a win number is? Okay, that's exciting. All right, well, we're going to dive in because it's really, really, really important. So first and most important thing for you to learn about in your campaign is your win number. Your win number is simple to calculate, but it's critical to your victory. It's the number of votes you need to win. Shocker. Everything else we'll talk about, telling your story, contacting voters, get out the vote, those will be strategies that you use to hit your win number on election day. Your win number is a simple majority of 50% of the voters plus 1. You don't need a landslide victory to win. We don't need a 90%, 80%. You just need 50% plus 1. With that said, what information do you need to turn 50% plus 1 into an actual number of votes? Your first stop is your local elections office, either in person or online. You'll want the results of at least the last 2 elections, but ideally 3 if you can get them. So let's think back to Sally. Sally is going to start with the Quincy election clerk, where she's going to file a request for election results from the last 3 elections for District 5. Every district is made up of precincts. A precinct is a small geographic boundary inside of a district. It is the most fundamental geographic unit of electoral politics. Precincts are usually the size of a neighborhood, and generally which one you're actually in determines where you're going to vote and who you're actually eligible to vote for. So when Sally requests election results from the registrar, she's going to receive a grand total breakdown by candidate, as well as the results broken down by precinct. Knowing which precincts have the most active voter base is going to be an essential tool for targeting jury or voting ID operations, which we'll touch on later on. Once you review this data, you're going to be able to get an average of how many voters will turn out so you can calculate your win number. So for Sally, someone actually ran opposed in her district in 2011. So the turnout was much lower than in years with several candidates. Since she's going to be running against the incumbent in November, she's decided not to take the 2011 results into account as the circumstances are too different from her election. This is the right call because Sally's win number should be a minimum number of votes she needs to win, so she doesn't want it to be too low. To be safe, she's going to eliminate the 2011 election, creating a more conservative and realistic number. All right, so now let's jump into some maths, which we're seeing on the screen. So we've got her actual win number to find out still. 10,065 people turned out to vote in the 2010 election. 2014 had 8,221. So to find the average of these 2 elections, we'll add 10,065 and 8,221, and then divide that number by 2, which gives us 9,143. The resulting 9,143 votes is the average total turnout. So we're going to multiply that by 0.53 to get our win number, which is 4,846 votes to win on election day. So why 0.53? Because if 50 plus 1 is the necessity, then 53% is a safer benchmark to plan for. If you aim for 53% of the vote, that's going to create a margin that you need to hit your mark, even if a few of your supporters actually don't turn out during our GOTV efforts and on election day. So the task ahead is clear. You know how many votes you will need to win on election day. It's now time to get your name on the ballot. To do that, you'll go to the same registrar or clerk's office and request the paperwork to file as a candidate.
The next thing that you want to do is understand your timeline. So map out a timeline between today or whatever day you decide to run and E-Day, election day. Calculate the number of days, weeks, and months in between now and then. Add in all of your filing and reporting deadlines, and of course, any important holidays in your district. Take your win number and calculate how many supporters you'll need throughout your campaign to hit your targets. Take your win number and divide by the weeks that you have left. This is the number of new supporters that you need per week in order to win. So set these as weekly supporter goals based on this data and be sure to hold yourself accountable. Budgeting. Next, you want to lay out a budget early to help identify what your fundraising goal should be. The first step is finding out what previous elections cost in your district. So return back to the place where you filed for office to request all of that financial information. All of this, by the way, is publicly available, so you should plan on reporting all of this information out as well. Now, let's split our costs up into two parts. The first is going to be your operational costs. That includes all the material things you need in order to run, and this should comprise about 20 to 30% of what your actual budget is. Your operational costs include your office space, utilities, and of course software, which is broken down to website, mass communication tools, donation tracking, logging interactions with your voters, and so on. The next piece is your voter persuasion cost. This includes all forms of communication and anything associated with how you're going to reach your people. After completing your budget, create a few different scaled back versions, maybe a backup plan and a shoestring budget. And remember, your budget is heavily reliant on your fundraising efforts. Now, as you can see here in NationBuilder, which is the screenshot pictured, we offer a ton of tools to help you track your expenditures, your incoming dollars, and of course, all of your financing in one place. Be sure that you've got a strong system to track, log, and report these finances. And now that we've gone through some of the kind of boring pre-campaign work, let's talk about the exciting stuff.
Yes, securing that message. So we discussed laying the foundations for your campaign. We're really going to dig in now on your messaging through telling your personal story. The first question everyone's going to ask you, why are you running for office? And it is a really big question to tackle. The goal of answering this question is actually not to talk about policy issue or give a stump speech, but it's to emotionally connect with what drives you to serve and actually be in public office. Before you get into any strategies of how you're going to bring about change, you first have to communicate why. Why are you running for office? Why should people vote for you? This is the heart of your campaign. Your voters don't care about your resume. They want to know your story. Take time to learn more about the voters in your area by talking and actually listening to them. This is how you will find out what issues are most important within your constituents at a local level and at a federal level. Find your allies within your district and start to build a relationship with these people. This could be your local Chamber of Commerce, roundtables, alumni groups, your local American Bar Association chapter, whatever it is, make sure you find those allies in your district. Make sure that your key issues are a part of your story. This should compel others to actually get involved with your campaign. So now let's talk about the tactics you can use to do this. Let me know in the chat box if you're familiar with the story of self, us, and now. This is based on Marshall Gans' work on public narrative at the Harvard Kennedy School. Gans breaks the public narrative into three pieces. The story of self, which is your call to leadership. The story of us, or the shared values and experiences in your community. And the story of now, which leads you towards strategy and action. Your story of self. You tell a story of self to enable others to get you, so that they experience the values that call you to serve and lead. The key focus is on moments when values led you to make the choices you did. So when did you first care about these particular issues? For example, what made you need to do something about them? When did you realize you had to run for office? Coming into the story of us, once you can clearly articulate your story of self, why you're called to lead, then you can tell the story of us. This enables your community to get each other and see the values they share. This can inspire people to act together, do great things. For example, like figuring out what it actually takes to get you elected to office. The us is less about a category that describes people like race or gender or language, but instead it's about values they share that are rooted in a common experience. By learning to tell a story of us, you can make those values come alive to inspire action. And lastly is the story of now. Once you've said why you're running for office and who it is that is going to join you, it's time to tell the story of now. This is meant to communicate a sense of urgency, a call to action. This story is rooted in the values that you celebrated in your stories of self and us. Your story of now must communicate the following. What is the urgent challenge that requires our action? What hope do we have that we can meet that challenge? What do we need to do to act? And finally, asking your community, will you join me? Be sure to develop several versions of your story, practice telling that story to your staff, your friends, your family, get feedback. Because as with anything, the more practice, the better it's going to be. All right, so now we've talked about win numbers, getting your name on the ballot and telling your story. It's time to start finding your supporters. The best place to start finding voters in your district is the voter file. A voter file is a list of registered voters in your district. You can request this for free from NationBuilder, or you can go to your county clerk's office. It's going to be a huge asset to your campaign. The voter file contains basic information like names, address, and some states include phone numbers and email addresses, but you definitely don't want to email blast the voter file, and we'll touch on that in a bit. The most valuable piece of information, though, is going to be vote history. Vote history doesn't show who someone voted for, but it does show if a voter cast a ballot in an election and how that ballot was cast. For example, a voter file might show that a person named John Rochford voted in the 2012 presidential election via mail-in ballot, but it's not going to show you which candidate John supported. Knowing how to interpret and use this information is essential. Many registered voters don't turn out to vote or don't vote very often, most just for presidential elections every 4 years. The number of participants in an election gets lower and lower the further down the ballot or the smaller the election is. Seek guidance from your kitchen cabinet. And no, I'm not talking about the actual cabinets in your kitchen, but your actual most trusted advisors. This is normally a configuration of people made up of your family and friends and mentors. They will help you pull together a list of supporters to really start kick your campaign. Make sure to look out for any trends that surface in this list of people. This is really going to help you when you're creating your target universes later in the campaign. Be sure to spend time and energy focusing on people who show a strong history of turning out to vote.
So let's talk now about how to make your voter file come to life. Finding your universe is great and all, but if your universe is just a list of names living in a spreadsheet, that is really not helping you. When your supporter information lives in a bunch of fragmented systems, like a donor database, a Google Doc, and maybe like a paper attendee sign-up sheet, it's actually really hard to get the full picture of your people. And that's why it's massively important to have a single source of truth that can help you identify who your folks are. Ideally, all that information about your supporters lives in a database that puts people at the center and allows you to understand who your supporters actually are. So let's take a look here at Ruth's profile. This is the way her profile shows up in the NationBuilder supporter database. And we can tell quite a lot about her just by looking at the screenshot. We know she's a rockstar volunteer, she's donated a good chunk of cash to your campaign, and most importantly, she's recruited a couple of people in her network to actually join your campaign. We can also tell she's a strong supporter and she's not actually affiliated with any particular party. So, Sorcha, how does all that work when you're actually talking to voters?
Yep, so that brings us nicely into the land of voter identification. So this is actually a conversation type. This is the conversation with registered voters to identify their level of support for you or lack thereof, because that is just as important. Voter data can tell you whether a person is likely to vote and sometimes their party affiliation, but the only way to know if they'll actually vote for you is if you just ask them. Someone from your campaign should speak to each voter, telling them a little bit about you, your positions on the issue, and then asking them which candidate they support. It is really important for your team to understand that ID conversations are not about convincing someone to vote for you. That's going to come, but a little later. The goal of an ID conversation is to ID, Shakara. After these conversations are complete, you will have a count of exactly how many voters support you, what voters are opposed, and who is undecided. There are a number of contact methods that you will use to have this conversation. So think about door knocking, phone banking, some mass communication, social media, but more heavily on that one-to-one communication type. On all the campaigns I've worked on throughout my life, it surprises me every single time we call a voter for the 5th time and they ask me, who is Sally? You need to speak to your voters at least 7 times so they know who you are, because people have lives, people are busy. This is not the only thing they're thinking about or caring about. Make sure you're keeping track of every data point that you acquire during these conversations. In particular, you need to be recording your voter support on a scale of 1 to 5. Taylor, let's show them what it looks like to actually keep track of this data.
Absolutely. So the identification part is key, but it's worth nothing if you're not tracking it really diligently. So you can record your voter support on a scale of 1 to 5. 1 indicates definite support of your campaign, and 5 means somebody's supporting the opposition. Make sure you're tracking any and all interactions, because I will say this a few times throughout this webinar, data is king. This is going to help you streamline your campaign, because everybody who's working on your staff will know who you're speaking to, when they were last contacted, and what their support status actually is. So now that you've really done your due diligence and have recorded, ideally in real time, where somebody falls on your supporter scale, how do you tailor your conversations with these folks? For example, how does your talk track vary based on somebody's status as a 3, undecided, or 4, weak oppose?
That is a real good question, Taylor, and it leads us nicely into the actual next conversation type. So you don't want to spend time on people who don't support you, right? So your 4s and your 5s. But what about those undecided voters, your 3s? Persuasion conversations are intended to persuade undecided voters to come your way. This is where you get to focus on the issues that are most important to those voters, and actually state where you as a candidate stand, and make sure that your team is able to articulate where you stand as a candidate using the story of Self, Us, and Now. This conversation is actually fully educational in nature, and is where you will use your story to really, really connect with the voter. Remember, supporters want to know your story. Be sure to teach your staffers and volunteers how to talk about your story, as well as their own story, incorporating Self, Us, and Now. This is your chance to actually leverage the data you've collected in your voter ID phase and convert people who have never heard of you into your supporters. These conversations should focus heavily on the universe of voters who is still undecided. Allow your supporters the opportunity to connect their story to yours, so that your campaign can truly put people at the center of your operation. This sounds like a lot of one-to-one work, but there genuinely is a way to do this at scale.
That's why it's so important to have a piece of technology that works in service of you to make your life easier. So aside from saving a hell of a lot of time and headache, one of the benefits of working within one centralized system is the ability to leverage all of the data you've been working so hard to collect. Data collection for data collection's sake is a little bit pointless. It's all about what you do with it. You want to be able to rely on one system that allows you to splice and dice your data into different strategic segments. You'll see here that NationBuilder makes it super easy to filter and segment based on the data that you've collected. So in this example, we're searching for all of our supporters who have recently attended one of our events. We're then going through the practice of cutting turf to hand walk sheets over to our canvassers. Here, we're using all of this dynamic data on the right to craft a personalized, or sorry, on the left rather, to craft personalized outreach to our supporters. We're surfacing their name, their neighborhood, all of that in an email, so that we're not reaching out saying, hey friend, will you support me in the neighborhood that you live in? You want to make it super personal. You want to make sure that you know who these folks are. To the right, we're showing what it looks like to drive somebody out to an event using text messaging. So research shows that text open rates are as high as 98% compared to just 20% of all emails. And on average, it takes about 90 seconds for somebody to respond to a text and 90 minutes to respond to an email. So remember, vary your forms of communication and connect with people in different ways. The goal of all of this is to recruit more supporters, persuade them to vote for you, and open up the channel for other forms of engagement. A big piece of this is not just connecting with voters, it's also connecting with your donors.
Oh, donations. So this is a real hard part of your campaign. If someone tells you otherwise, they are lying to you. So fundraising, it's a key component of your campaign. And as the candidate, you will need to be making fundraising asks of your nearest and dearest before spreading out into the wider pool of voters. None of the candidates I have worked with have ever particularly enjoyed call time, but it is a must. When you're driving from event A to event B, get call time on the book so you can give your campaign the money it needs for mailers, digital ads, radio ads, etc. You've already found people who are your supporters, so start thinking about who of those folks can actually become donors. Make sure to separate people who can become fundraisers versus people who can become small dollar donors. You really want to be using a combination of digital and on the ground when you're thinking about your donor recruitment strategy. Small dollar online events will be more oriented around the high dollars. Employ strategies like peer-to-peer fundraising. And so today's webinar is really focused on learning how to run for office, but we have a number of courses at NationBuilder that will specifically teach you about fundraising and all of the different tactics that you can employ. So really here, we want you to start to think about how you can use your campaign's digital infrastructure to fundraise.
I think it's helpful to look at a really strong example of that. So this is the Andrew Yang campaign's fundraising page. When I log into yang2020.com, I actually can't even access the main website without going through this splash page. So that tells me one thing. Their number one priority right now is fundraising. And they do a pretty good job with it. They have a really clear and concise call to action that's not super wordy. They make it easy for supporters to give small dollar donations as well as larger gifts. But the important thing to call out here is how they're actually collecting this data, because again, data is king. Because Andrew Yang is using NationBuilder, his website, his action pages, and this donation page is robustly integrated with his supporter database. So what that means is whenever somebody takes an action on his site, that action is automatically synced to their supporter profile. So say I'm somebody who's never heard of Andrew Yang, but he performs really well on the second debates, and I want to see what he's all about. I go to his website, I land on this page, and I've decided, hey, I like this guy, I'm gonna contribute a few bucks. My record will be created automatically within NationBuilder and updated with my activity without his staff needing to lift a finger. So really the key here is to have all of the information about your constituents in one place, whether they're a voter, donor, volunteer, what have you, so that you can think about one of the most important pieces of your campaign, which is GOTV.
Get out the vote, or GOTV, is one of the most intense and exciting periods of time during your campaign. I have done countless number of GOTV efforts in my life, and it is tiresome. You will be completely deprived of sleep, and Red Bull will be your best friend, but it is honestly one of the best parts of a campaign. This is actually when you're going to focus all your efforts on making sure your supporters turn out to vote on election day. GOTV is not a simple component of your campaign, and we could honestly spend a full hour running through what you need for a successful GOTV campaign. And honestly, we might actually have to just organize that for you. But for now, I'm going to try and run you through kind of the basics of what you need. So by now you know your win number and we have your voter universes locked. What that means is no more voter ID or persuasion conversation with your voters. With those pieces in place, you can actually plan the full scope of your GOTV efforts to get your supporters to the polls. Generally, get out the vote efforts take place the last week before the election, but sometimes campaigns will want to do an absentee GOTV that actually will probably carry on for the whole last month of the campaign. We're going to go through the important ingredients now, though, that are necessary for your successful GOTV campaign. So to help illustrate this, let's look back at our example candidate, Sally, who is running for City Council in Quincy, Massachusetts. So she spent the last several months identifying her vote goals, fundraising, contacting voters, leading her supporters on paths of engagement, and telling her story. The last thing she's got to do now is actually get these people off their couches and to the polls. There might be some folks in Sally's district who really want to vote, but for whatever reason, have a hard time getting to the polls. So she is going to assign some of her volunteers the task of driving voters to the poll. This is commonly known as a Rise to the Polls program and is a really key component to a successful GOTV launch. Once you've figured out what volunteers you need in place for GOTV, it's actually time to make sure that you're able to pull this off. During Get Out the Vote, talking to your voters is your #1 priority. If we look back at Sally, we are thinking through how does she actually go into this GOTV? What does she need to prepare? So when we are thinking about our audiences, we know that we have our 1s and 2s and 3s, our 4s and 5s. We are ignoring 3s, 4s, and 5s, and we are only focusing on 1s and 2s for our GOTV effort. The reason being, we do not want to call people out who are strong opposed, lean against, or undecided. We only want to pull people out who have confirmed and committed to vote for us. When you're thinking about that, you're hitting your win number, that number that we talked about, that key important number of the campaign. You need to call these people multiple times, phone bank, knocking on doors for these individuals of ones and twos to get your win number, to make sure that you're going out to the polls. So we think about how can we do that. There's 4 key things to think about. Number 1, communication. We're going to be thinking about sending types of different comms out during election day. So we have our 7 a.m. blast that goes out to let everyone know your polls open in 1 hour. Then we are going to have a targeted blast that's going to go out to people in the mid-afternoon. We want to make sure that people who are at home, parents, folks who are not currently working, and we know all of this because we have collected this data in our voter ID and our persuasion phase. We're going to send those folks a blast to let them know that their poll is open for an X remaining hours. And then finally, your last target audience for both email blast and text will be the people on this call, right? Young professionals, folks who are getting home from work at 6 o'clock and have 2 hours to get to the poll. We've all received those emails, and I've been someone who created those target audiences for campaigns. Up next is your data entry. You have to be nimble. You need to know that, okay, I'm not doing as well, there's not high enough voter turnout in this precinct, and you'll do that with your poll workers. And again, as I said, there's a lot of information in GOTV, and we can do another session on it, but you'll be able to actually iterate on what you set as a priority during that day based on what you're seeing happening at the polls. Last but not least is your candidate. It is important as the candidate to show up as much as you can throughout your district on election day. Pro tip here, call your local media outlets, ask when they will be looking for live shots from the polls, and you can then use that information to coordinate the candidate schedule around those locations and those times of the day so that you're there and you're in front of the media showing them that you care about your election.
Now let's talk a little bit more about your digital infrastructure. The key thing that I want to drive home here is your technology is not a crutch. It's meant to help enable you to do your jobs better, to allow your candidate and your staffers to do the really important work that they need to do. Now, with all that said, there are a few non-negotiables and bare necessities that you absolutely need if you're going to run a campaign. The first is an action-driving website. You need to have a place where people can come find you, read about you, learn about your policies, and more importantly, learn how to get involved. So this is the really key first component, because this is how you're going to connect with all of your supporters in a scalable way. The second piece is a supporter database, or a CRM, if you want to think of it as that. This ideally should be your central source of truth. This should house all of the information that you have ever collected on your voters, your volunteers, your fundraisers, your donors, etc. This should be a people and supporter-centric database that allows you to understand who your people are, enables you to learn about them, so that you can then go ahead and have really personalized and impactful conversations with your folks. Next, your voter data. Now this means your voter file, which we've already covered, all of your historical voter information from your district and the campaigns that have come before you, so that you can learn how to engage with folks, and then more importantly, how to persuade them. Next is advanced segmentation and mapping tools. So this segmentation piece is how you're going to create these very specific universes of people, as Sorcha was just talking about in the last slide. So this is going to help you use your data to your advantage. It's going to allow you to splice and dice your supporter community into a bunch of different chunks so that you can figure out how to push a relevant message out to that group of people. Mapping tools are super important for all of your on-the-ground work. So this is really important when it comes to canvassing. Be sure that you know physically where your supporters live so that you can engage with them in that way, especially when you're thinking about doing those really, really meaningful one-to-one touch points where you're coming into their home or talking to them face-to-face. The next piece is mass communication. This is both email and texting. We talked about this before, but super important to vary the ways in which you're communicating with people. You want to remain super relevant, and a big piece of that is enabling advanced personalization. So think back to that screenshot that we showed a few slides back where we're surfacing all of the dynamic data that we've collected, and that means name, neighborhood, even as granular as the last gift one of your donors made. Make sure you're surfacing that and saying, hey, name, thank you so much for your last gift of X amount of dollars. We're hosting an event in insert your neighborhood. Will you please RSVP? Next, fundraising software, because this is how you are going to fuel your campaign. You need to have a really strong place to collect all of those donations, but also to track your finances. And lastly, event registration software. So you need a place where people can sign up, RSVP, and attend all of the events that you're putting on so that they can get to know you and the volunteers who are working so hard for you. There are some additional resources that you can also use if you want to build a more tech-savvy campaign. And this is everything from canvassing technology to phone banking software, data analytics and enhancement tools, and peer-to-peer fundraising. We will go forward and do another webinar about all of this, and we'll offer that in our email follow-up to you all. The point that I really want to drive home here is that with NationBuilder, you have all of those things located in one place. You don't have to sign with 100 different vendors to get all of the necessary infrastructure that you need. You can do all of that here in the NationBuilder platform. This includes all of the things that you're seeing here on the screen, and all of this works in service of that greater goal to put people at the center so you can have informed conversations with them and make them go out to vote for you, get them to mobilize on your behalf.
Okay, so technology is not the strategy you actually need for your political campaign. Everything we've discussed today gives you the tools to run for office by putting people at the center of your campaign. Yes, don't get me wrong, technology is a key part of doing that at scale, but it should absolutely not be your overarching strategy. And I've worked with candidates who went down that route and it really did not go well. So in wrapping up this, before we dive into questions, I want to just reflect on kind of the technologies landscape that we've seen in the presidential campaigns in the 2000s. We can see the speed at which technology has become a vital part of every campaign. Long gone are the days of paper walk lists, call scripts, press releases, and actually going and being there with the paper data entry, and I'm pretty thankful for that. 2004, campaigns saw the rise of using email and the internet to attract donors and voters. 2008 campaigns, we saw the revolution of online small dollar donors. 2016 campaigns, we saw social media take over the narrative, from digital ads to 24/7 ability to interacting with your candidates to live streaming. 2020 is happening right now. There are a lot of unknowns for what this year will bring, but one thing for sure, any candidate running in 2020 needs to be putting their voters at the center of their campaign operation. And we really hope that today you are able to gather the tools of how you can do that. So with that said, I'm gonna pass it back to Taylor and we'll dive into questions.
Yes.
I think I've learned enough to join Andrew Yang in the 2020 race right now. I'm just saying I'm ready to go. Well, we did get a couple. We did get a couple of questions, guys. The first one we have from one of our listeners is, do people running for local or municipal office use campaign managers? And if so, what are the approximate costs of running?
That is a great question. And so to share personally about my background, I came to the US in 2012 and started working on some campaigns, a lot of them actually local and municipal offices. I have worked with campaigns in both of those spheres that have had both a campaign manager and a just straight up kitchen cabinet of advisors. It really depends on the intensity of the race. Are there multiple candidates running? Is there a runoff race? What do your finance look like, right? Like it's really going to be situational. But I would say if you have the economic ability to get a campaign manager, I would recommend it. In terms of the approximate costs of running, that's a real big question. It depends on the race. If you're looking at local office, like a school board race, here in Massachusetts, I've seen folks run on $20,000 for a campaign. I've also seen folks spend over $100K on city council races in Quincy. So it is very variable of the situation. But if you do want to kind of dig in a little bit more on what the tech costs are, we can obviously share that with you, and consultants will vary state to state.
All right, fantastic. And we do have a second question. How do I find out where I can run with the highest likelihood of winning? Possibly Virginia, this person is asking.
That's amazing.
This is a fantastic question. Go for it, Taylor.
Oh no, go ahead and take it. I just love that question.
Oh, sorry. Cool. So how do I find out where I can run with the highest likelihood of winning? I feel like everyone would like to know that in both the political space and everything else at life. There's a number of ways you can assess your likelihood of winning. So one is, are you racing against an incumbent? Understanding the particular, news cycle within the district at which you're running. So are there large issues that are coming up in your community that you can kind of affiliate your story and your campaign with that will cause voters to want to interact with you? Thinking about Virginia for running, that's a very specific state, and I'm sure that there are a number of ways that you can actually impact your community there. But identifying the highest likelihood of winning, you want to be looking at your voter data, your vote history. You also want to be looking at how much folks have raised in the past elections to identify kind of your likelihood of being able to match that if necessary.
Awesome. We have another question. It's how do you balance a full-time job and running a campaign?
Ooh, that one is so true. I will speak from personal experience here. So one of my good friends, I was a consultant on a mayoral race in Massachusetts, and my good friend was the campaign manager, but it was not an official role. And she also had her full-time job as a principal of a high school. And it is not easy. It's not easy to balance a full-time job and run a campaign or be a candidate. But if it is something that you truly believe in and that you have to lead, there is something in that moment that is making you want to do this and need to do this, it's going to be worth all of the pain in the long run. When you're thinking about your time, how to balance it, I recommend actually scheduling out your month in advance. So looking at, are there candidate forums I need to be attending? Are there local allies in my communities, unions, chambers of commerce events, etc., that I need to be attending as a candidate, as well as balancing your actual full-time job?
Those are great points. And I will also add, since a lot of our listeners are young lawyers, you can always reach out to the ABA. You have a lot of contacts in the ABA who will also be able to help you navigate, some people who have done these things before, or people that can help you answer the questions on what do you do with your law practice while you take on this heavy responsibility. So, good plug for the ABA there as well.
Absolutely.
Another question. Do you have something to add, Taylor?
Oh, I think that was Sorcha, but I think she was just agreeing with you. She was saying absolutely.
Gotcha. Do we have any ideas for strategies around fundraising for municipal local campaigns that need to raise about $5,000?
Oh, yeah. So fundraising, one thing to kind of put as a caveat to all of this, in every state, there are different laws as it relates to fundraising for different elected offices. So always make sure to check that out. I'm speaking to ABA, so I feel very confident that y'all will go and check out applicable laws. But moving on, when you're looking at raising kind of a small dollar amount around 5K, there are a couple of different ways that you can go about that. The first is your personal network as a candidate. So we touched on candidate call time. Candidate call time is basically thinking about it as like if you're starting a business, your seed money, the people that you go to because they believe in you and they trust you, that's kind of your first base. Given that you only need to raise 5K in this instance, you're probably only looking to get, $1,500 to $2,000 off of that kind of kitchen cabinet orientation. Your next pool of people are going to be your voters that you've identified as supporters. And so making sure that you are actually building a relationship with these individuals so that when you go and ask them for money, it's not going to come as a foreign ask. thinking about peer-to-peer strategy, so creating fundraisers within your network. What I mean by that is actually going around to your supporters who you've identified and you've built those individual relationships with and asking if any of them have the capacity to be a fundraiser for you. When someone is a fundraiser for you, they're going to have kind of a dollar amount affiliated with them as an individual that they've committed to raise for your campaign. That can be as little as $100, it can be as much as $1,000. And in that, you'll provide them with resources to ensure that they can take that across the finish line. So things like campaign bumper stickers, t-shirts, maybe it's coffee, Dunkin' Donuts, some bagels for a coffee hour or a happy hour, depending on what your flavor is, helping them out to resource that and showing up as the candidate to speak on their behalf. So as I said earlier, there's a number of resources that we have at NationBuilder in particular as it relates to fundraising. So if there's more meat you want there, just let us know.
One of the other things that I'll just add to that is the benefit of enabling something like peer-to-peer fundraising, especially when you're in more of like a smaller local election, is when you enable peer-to-peer, there's this kind of like sense of credibility and inherent trust that's built in when you've got folks who are raising money from their own networks, especially if you're trying to contact folks that you don't necessarily know. When you enable peer-to-peer and let folks kind of recruit more donors on your behalf, they're usually reaching out to their friends, family, acquaintances, people who have like similar belief systems. They are more willing to check out, the fundraiser if they know the person and they know, hey, I trust this individual. I know what their, political agenda or whatever it is. So enabling that kind of peer-to-peer can open up quite a lot of possibilities for you.
Understood. Thank you. And we have one final question. This person is interested in covering online presence during a campaign or in holding office. Is social media presence expected or required?
Yeah,
I think it's required. I mean, with the trends that Sorcha covered towards the end, I think that people just expect you to be there. Like, yes, of course, it's important to have a campaign infrastructure and all of the tools around that, but I think that you need to be using social as a way to connect with voters, donors, supporters on another level, because I think that everyone's kind of doing that now. I don't know if you have something to add to that, Sorcha, but I think it's definitely a requirement.
Yeah, like if you're running for office, you are opening up your life, your personal life, to everyone for criticism, for excitement, and there is an expectation as a public servant that you have availability and you are transparent with folks. And so we now have the tools and the technology that allow us to do that. And being online in both a social media capacity and a digital infrastructure capacity is a key component of running for office.
Thank you. Well, those are all the questions.
Okay.
Excellent. Well, let's just quickly go over a few calls to action. If this is something that is really interesting to you, you're ready to take the next step, you're ready to run for office, you can go ahead and start for free. We have a unique link for all of our folks at ABA. So it's just nationbuilder.com/ABA. You can also reach out to Sorcha and I directly if you want any help getting started. Our emails are listed there. It's just srochford@nationbuilder.com and tsayig@nationbuilder.com. We are more than happy to answer more questions, help you get going. And then additionally, as Tracy said at the top of the call, these webinar slides will be accessible and sent to you via email. Do not hesitate to reach out with any questions, and we'll be doing a series of strategic webinars coming up in the near future, and that will also be shared with you in the follow-up email.
All right, perfect. Well, thank you again. First of all, I want to thank everyone for joining us today. We had over a couple hundred people register for this seminar, so thank you everyone for joining us. And I would especially like to thank our speakers, Sorcha Rochford and Taylor Sayig from NationBuilder, for sharing this wealth of knowledge. And I really want to push everyone to go out there, take advantage of these services and these tools that are being offered, and go out there and make a difference in our communities. And if any of our listeners want to learn more about the Young Lawyers Division, and the Seat at the Table initiative, please be sure to visit the ABA website. And if you want to receive tips, best practices, and advice from NationBuilder's team of campaigning experts, please visit the NationBuilder website. So that's all I have. Thank you again, everyone, for joining. And please go out there and make a difference in your communities. Thank you, ladies. Everyone have a great day.
Thank you so much. Go out there and run for something.